At 2:17 a.m. on November 28, 1943, Corporal Vernon Guidry crouched in chest-deep swamp water, 40 yards behind the American defensive perimeter on Bougainville Island, listening to a sound that shouldn't exist. Pebbles rattling in a sea ration can. The noise trigger had activated. Something was in his trapline. Vernon was 24 years old. He'd spent 3 nights building the system alone. 400 yards of vine snares, trip wires, and noise alerts positioned along a Japanese infiltration route. 0 authorization from command, 0 assistance from his unit. If the trapline failed, he'd face court-martial for unauthorized defensive modifications. If it worked, he might save lives. Either way, the next 40 minutes would determine whether Louisiana muskrat trapping techniques could stop Japanese infiltrators who'd killed 94 Americans in the past 3 months. He couldn't see his own hands in the darkness. The swamp smelled like rotting mangrove roots and stagnant water. His rifle was slick with condensation, and somewhere ahead of him, trapped soldiers were discovering what happens when humans walk into traps designed for animals. The problem started in September 1943, when the 37th Infantry Division established defensive positions along the coastal perimeter of Bougainville Island. The terrain was nightmare fuel for defensive doctrine. 3.2 miles of coastline, 8 separate mangrove swamp sections, each 200 to 600 yards wide. Water depth ranged from 2 to 5 feet during high tide. Visibility at night, less than 10 feet. Standard defensive protocol called for sentry posts every 200 yards, but the swamps created gaps. Areas too deep to patrol effectively, too dense to see through, too treacherous for regular foot traffic. Japanese infiltrators exploited these gaps immediately. They moved at night through the waterlogged channels, wading through chest-deep water for hours. They'd emerge behind American lines, kill sentries, sabotage equipment, and disappear back into the swamps before dawn. The pattern was mechanical and brutal. 2 to 4 successful infiltrations per week. By November, the 37th had lost 94 soldiers to these attacks. Battalion Command tried everything. Increased foot patrols in October. Result, soldiers got lost in the mangroves. 3 cases of heat exhaustion, 1 drowning when Private James Chen stepped into a submerged root hole and couldn't surface with full combat gear. The patrol stopped after Chen died. Illumination flares came next. Standard doctrine for revealing enemy movement. Battalion fired flares over suspected infiltration routes for a week. Result? The bright light revealed American positions to Japanese artillery observers. Counter-battery fire killed 7 Americans in 4 days. The flares stopped. Trip flares installed directly in the swamps seemed promising. Engineers placed 43 trip flare mechanisms along water channels in mid-October. Result? Salt water corroded the firing mechanisms within 48 hours. 0 successful activations, 0 enemy detected. The trip flares were abandoned. Someone suggested guard dogs. The 37th had 12 trained military working dogs. They deployed 4 dogs with handlers into swamp patrol areas. Result? Dogs couldn't operate in deep water. One handler, Corporal David Morrison, was bitten by a crocodile while trying to manage his dog through a mangrove channel. Morrison survived, but required medical evacuation. The dogs were reassigned to dryland perimeter duty. Listening posts were established. Small 2-man positions forward of the main perimeter, specifically placed to detect infiltrator movement. Problem: Japanese infiltrators moved too slowly to generate detectable noise. They'd stand motionless in water for 30 minutes at a time, waiting for American sentries to shift attention. Then advance 3 feet. Stop again. The listening posts never heard them coming. By November, battalion intelligence had documented the pattern with brutal precision. Private James Morrison, September 12th. Throat cut while on sentry duty, 300 hours. Sergeant David Chen, September 19th. Killed during equipment sabotage attack, 0430 hours. Corporal William Hayes, October 3rd. Disappeared on patrol, body found 3 days later with signs of drowning and combat trauma. All three were experienced soldiers. All three followed standard defensive procedures. All three died anyway. Battalion Commander Colonel James Whitaker held 4 emergency meetings between September and November. He requested additional engineering support from Division Headquarters. Division response: work with available resources. Whitaker requested specialized equipment for swamp defense. Division response: equipment unavailable. Prioritize existing assets. Whitaker requested tactical guidance for unconventional infiltration threats. Division response: maintain standard defensive protocols. The official assessment from Division Command was stark. Terrain advantage favors enemy infiltration. Accept casualties as operational cost. Translation: soldiers would keep dying, and Command had no solution. Vernon Guidry arrived on Bougainville in September 1943 and immediately recognized something nobody else saw. The terrain was identical to home. Vernon was born in 1919 in Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. His family had trapped muskrats and nutria in the bayou for 3 generations. His grandfather started the Trapline business in 1890. His father expanded it in 1910. Vernon began trapping at age 7, running lines with his father through water channels that looked exactly like these mangrove swamps. By age 16, Vernon operated 40 trap lines through Louisiana bayous. He knew every swamp sound. Alligator movement sounded different than nutria. Water moccasins created specific ripple patterns. A heron landing made distinct splash characteristics compared to a muskrat diving. Vernon could navigate Louisiana swamps in complete darkness, using only sound and the feel of water current against his legs. The Army drafted him in March 1942. Basic training at Fort Benning, Georgia. Infantry assignment based on test scores and physical fitness evaluations. He was a competent soldier, not exceptional, not problematic. He followed orders, maintained equipment, and kept his head down. The Army assigned him to Company C, 2nd Battalion, 37th Infantry Division. Standard rifleman duties, patrols, sentry posts, perimeter defense. His first week on Bougainville, Vernon drew swamp patrol duty. Squad leader Sergeant Frank Murphy led 8 soldiers through a mangrove section east of the perimeter. They moved slowly, weapons ready, scanning for enemy movement. The patrol lasted 6 hours and covered maybe 800 yards. They saw nothing, heard nothing, returned to base exhausted and frustrated. But Vernon saw everything. He recognized the mangrove species. Same root structure as Louisiana coastal swamps, same tidal patterns, same water salinity, same dark channels where water depth made wading possible but swimming difficult. And he saw something else. Game trails. Animals in Louisiana bayous didn't move randomly. They followed specific paths through swamps. Paths where water depth was consistent, where vegetation provided cover, where the bottom was solid enough to walk without sinking into mud. These paths appeared naturally over time as animals repeatedly used the same routes. A trained eye could spot them. Broken vegetation at water level, disturbed mud on exposed roots, crushed snail shells where animals stepped. The signs were subtle but unmistakable. Vernon saw identical signs in the Bougainville swamps. Broken mangrove shoots at 18 inches above water, disturbed algae patterns on submerged roots, compressed mud in shallow sections. This wasn't animal traffic. This was human traffic. Japanese infiltrators were using game trails, not random infiltration routes. Specific, repeated paths through the swamp where water depth and vegetation created optimal movement corridors. Vernon mentioned this to Sergeant Murphy during post-patrol debriefing. Murphy listened politely, nodded, said it was interesting, and told Vernon to write it in his diary if he wanted to remember it. Vernon tried explaining the game trail concept in more detail. Murphy's response was direct. Japanese aren't animals, Guidry. They're trained soldiers. They're probably using maps and coordinates, not animal trails. Vernon dropped the subject, but he kept watching the swamps. Every patrol, he'd look for the signs, and he found them, consistently. The infiltrators used the same 3 or 4 channels repeatedly. Vernon could predict which routes they'd use based on tide cycles and vegetation density. It was exactly how muskrats moved through Louisiana bayous. Follow the path of least resistance. Use the same proven routes. Don't waste energy exploring new terrain when known routes work. October 8th changed everything. Vernon's foxhole partner was Private Eddie Morrison, 20 years old, from Ohio. Good kid. Talked about his girlfriend back home. Showed Vernon photographs. They'd been sharing a fighting position for 3 weeks. That night, Morrison drew sentry duty. 0300 to 0500 hours, standard 2-hour shift. Vernon was supposed to sleep while Morrison watched the perimeter. Vernon lay in the foxhole listening to jungle sounds. Insects, distant artillery, the occasional rifle shot from another sector. At 0347, Morrison screamed. Vernon grabbed his rifle, rolled out of the foxhole. Morrison was 30 yards away at the perimeter gap. Vernon ran toward him. By the time he reached Morrison's position, the infiltrators were gone. Morrison was on the ground, throat cut, bleeding out. Vernon applied pressure to the wound, called for medic. Morrison died before help arrived. The infiltrators had used the game trail that ran directly through the perimeter gap 30 yards north of Vernon's foxhole. Vernon had walked that trail during afternoon patrol. He'd seen the signs: fresh, broken vegetation, disturbed mud. He'd known infiltrators used that route, but he hadn't told anyone because nobody believed him about game trails. And now, Morrison was dead. If Vernon had been watching the game trail instead of the perimeter, he would have seen them coming. If command had listened to him about game trails, they could have positioned sentries to cover those specific routes. But doctrine said, defend the perimeter, not the trails. And doctrine had gotten Morrison killed. October continued the pattern. 23 successful infiltrations, 31 American casualties. November started worse. 14 successful infiltrations in the first 15 days. 19 American casualties. Company C was down to 73% strength. Replacements arrived slower than casualties accumulated. Morale deteriorated. Soldiers stopped volunteering for sentry duty. Some requested transfer to different units. Nobody wanted to die in a swamp. November 10th, Colonel Whitaker issued new defensive protocols. Double sentry posts at predicted infiltration zones. More soldiers, same gaps, same doctrine. Result: Japanese simply used different game trails. The doubling of sentries covered positions, not routes. Vernon watched the new protocol fail in real time. He knew the solution: trap the game trails, remove the infiltrators' mobility advantage, force them onto predictable paths, then immobilize them on those paths. It was exactly how his family trapped muskrats. The bayou was too big to trap everywhere. You trapped the game trails. Once you knew the patterns, you knew where to set traps. November 16th, Vernon requested a meeting with Company Commander Captain James Mitchell. Mitchell was 32 years old, West Point graduate, competent officer. He'd led Company C through 3 months of combat operations. He listened to Vernon's proposal for exactly 4 minutes. Vernon explained the game trail concept, showed Mitchell the routes on a hand-drawn map, explained how traplines worked in Louisiana, described the system he wanted to build. Tripwires, vine snares, noise alerts, non-lethal immobilization, would cost $0, use salvaged materials, cover the primary infiltration route, prevent penetrations without requiring additional manpower. Mitchell's response was institutional. "We're not hunters setting traps, Corporal. We're soldiers with rifles. Your job is to patrol and shoot. Stick to your job." Vernon tried explaining how the system would work operationally. Mitchell cut him off. Dismissed. Meeting over. No authorization, no permission to build anything. November 17th. Private Thomas Baker died on sentry duty. 0420 hours. Baker was 19 years old, from Ohio. He'd shown Vernon photographs of his girlfriend 2 days earlier. Same girlfriend Morrison had talked about. Baker and Morrison had grown up together, enlisted together, shipped out together. Now they were dead together. Vernon knew which game trail the infiltrators had used to reach Baker. He'd seen the signs during afternoon patrol the previous day. Fresh vegetation damage, recent mud disturbance. He could have warned Baker to watch that specific approach. But warning without solution was useless. Baker needed protection, not information. That night, Vernon made his decision. He would build the trapline, with or without authorization, with or without support. The Army could court-martial him afterward if they wanted. But he wasn't going to watch more soldiers die while command refused to listen. He had the knowledge. 3 generations of bayou trapping experience. He had the terrain, same mangroves, same water, same game trails as Louisiana. He had the materials, vines growing everywhere, bamboo in the inland jungle, wire from damaged communications equipment, empty C-ration cans for noise triggers. What he didn't have was permission. Building unauthorized defensive modifications violated regulations. Operating behind the perimeter without orders violated protocol. Using salvaged military equipment for unofficial purposes violated supply chain doctrine. Vernon didn't care. Regulations hadn't saved Morrison. Protocol hadn't saved Baker. Doctrine had killed 94 Americans in 3 months. He would build the trapline, 3 nights of work, 400 yards of coverage. The primary infiltration route that had been penetrated 7 times in the past month. If it worked, soldiers would live. If it failed, he'd face consequences. Vernon Guidry was a corporal from Louisiana who trapped muskrats before the war. He wasn't special, wasn't a tactical genius, wasn't a decorated hero. He just understood something simple that command had missed. Animals follow patterns. Humans are animals. Trap the pattern, stop the animal. On November 18, 1943, Vernon began building his trapline in direct violation of orders. Nobody knew, nobody helped, nobody gave permission. And in 10 days, 27 Japanese infiltrators would discover what happens when soldiers walk paths designed for muskrats. November 18, 1943. Vernon volunteered for swamp patrol duty. Sergeant Murphy assigned him to afternoon reconnaissance with 3 other soldiers. They patrolled the eastern mangrove section for 6 hours. Vernon studied the terrain with different eyes now. Not looking for enemy positions, looking for trap positions. The primary infiltration route was obvious once you knew what to look for. A 400-yard channel running north-south between 2 dense mangrove clusters. Water depth, 3 to 4 feet at high tide. Perfect for wading. Too deep to run, shallow enough to move steadily. The channel had been used 7 times in 3 weeks, based on vegetation damage patterns Vernon had documented. Fresh broken shoots, disturbed algae, mud displacement on roots. This was the highway. This was where he'd build. He drew a mental map. 16 trap cluster positions, spaced every 25 yards along the channel. Each cluster would have 3 components. Stage 1, submerged tripwire at ankle height, 18 inches below water surface. Stage 2, vine snares positioned 2 feet beyond tripwires, designed to catch and hold. Stage 3, noise triggers suspended 4 feet above water, activated by struggling. The system would be invisible, completely camouflaged using natural swamp vegetation, and it would work exactly like his muskrat trap lines back home. Materials came from salvage. Vernon collected them over 2 days without drawing attention. Vine cordage from strangler figs growing inland. The vines had approximately 200 pounds tensile strength when braided. He cut sections at night, stored them under his shelter half. Bamboo stakes from a grove 800 yards west of the perimeter. He cut 32 pieces during a solo patrol, claimed he was checking for enemy observation posts. Wire came from damaged field telephone lines. The communications section had a salvage pile. Vernon took 200 feet over 3 visits, enough that nobody noticed the reduction. Noise triggers were simple. 15 empty sea ration cans. Every soldier had empties. Vernon collected them from trash areas, filled them with pebbles from the beach. Total material cost, $0. Total preparation time, 2 days. Total people who knew what he was planning, 0. November 19th, 2,200 hours. Vernon told his squad he was checking the perimeter, standard practice. Soldiers often walked the line at night to stay alert. Nobody questioned it. He carried rope, wire, and bamboo in his pack. Entered the swamp from the eastern perimeter gap. Water temperature felt like 75 degrees. Visibility was maybe 5 feet even, with a quarter moon providing minimal light. He located the primary game trail by feel. His hands moved along mangrove roots underwater, feeling for the worn patterns where traffic had compressed algae growth. Found it. The channel ran exactly where his mental map predicted. He positioned the first trap cluster at the southern entrance, knelt in chest-deep water, started working. Tripwire first. He anchored braided vine to mangrove roots on both channel sides. Set the wire 18 inches below surface. Tested tension by stepping on it carefully. 8 to 10 pounds of pressure triggered movement. That matched average footstep force in water. He stepped on it 3 times. Wire held. Created resistance without breaking. Perfect. Snare positioning took longer. Vernon cut 2 vine loops, 14 inches diameter, sized for boots or bare feet. He hung them at 12 inches and 18 inches below surface, 2 feet beyond the tripwire. The knot was critical. Constrictor knot design, same technique he'd used for muskrat traps since age 7. The harder you pulled, the tighter it gripped. A muskrat would struggle for 30 minutes before exhausting itself. A human would struggle longer, but with same result. Immobilization. Noise trigger assembly was simplest component. He suspended a sea ration can 4 feet above water using vine cordage. Filled it with 20 to 30 small pebbles. Attached it to the snare line with a 3-foot leader. When the snare caught an ankle, struggling would pull the leader taut. The can would rattle. Sound carried approximately 100 yards through swamp. Loud enough to alert American positions. Specific enough to pinpoint location. Camouflage required attention to detail. Vernon covered all above water components with mangrove leaves. Smeared mud on the can to eliminate shine. Disturbed surrounding vegetation to create natural appearance. From 10 feet away in daylight, the trap cluster was invisible. At night, it was completely undetectable. He tested it by walking away 30 feet and approaching from different angles. Couldn't see it. Couldn't detect it. Perfect. First cluster took 90 minutes to install. Vernon checked his watch. 01:30 hours. He needed to return before dawn. That gave him 2 more hours. He moved to the second position. 25 yards north. Repeated the process. Tripwire, snares, noise trigger, camouflage. By 0400 hours, he'd completed 4 trap clusters, 100 yards of coverage. His hands were cut from wire and bamboo. Salt water made the cuts burn. He couldn't bandage them. That would raise questions. Vernon returned to the perimeter at 04:15. His squad was asleep. Nobody had noticed his absence. He lay in his foxhole thinking about the next night. 12 more clusters to install, 300 yards remaining. His back ached from bending in water for 6 hours. His legs cramped from standing in cold water. But 4 clusters were done. The system was starting to exist. November 20th. No moon. Complete darkness. Vernon entered the swamp at 2200 hours. Finding trap cluster 4 took 30 minutes. He had to feel along the tripwires by hand, moving slowly through the water. When he finally located the 4th position, he continued north to cluster 5. Problems developed immediately. Bamboo stake broke during installation. Insufficient drying time. The green bamboo split under tension. Vernon replaced it with a mangrove branch. Stronger. Naturally water-resistant. Better choice. He modified his material selection for remaining clusters. Wire developed a kink at one anchor point. Wouldn't hold proper tension. He repositioned the anchor 3 feet south. Tested it. Held correctly. One snare loop caught on a submerged root. Vernon redesigned the positioning to account for root placement. Each problem cost time. Each solution improved the system. Wildlife complicated the work. A crocodile approximately 8 feet long passed within 10 feet of Vernon at 0100 hours. He froze, held his breath, didn't move. The crocodile continued past, didn't investigate. Vernon waited 5 minutes before resuming work. His heart rate took 10 minutes to normalize. At 0230, a water moccasin swam across his submerged leg. Vernon felt the movement, didn't react, let it pass. These were the swamp's residents. He was the intruder. The animals tolerated his presence as long as he respected theirs. Technical refinements emerged through repetition. Clusters 5 through 8 went into a narrower channel section. Vernon adjusted spacing to 20 yards instead of 25. Better coverage in constricted terrain. He modified snare angles for deeper water sections where infiltrators would wade with higher knee lift. Added redundant noise triggers at cluster 6. That position sat at the highest traffic point based on vegetation damage. If infiltrators came through, they'd hit cluster 6. Vernon wanted double confirmation. Each trap cluster required 45 to 50 minutes to install and camouflage properly. Vernon worked until 0345. 8 trap clusters total, 200 yards covered, halfway complete. His hands were shredded. Every cut burned from saltwater immersion. He couldn't bandage them during the day. Soldiers would ask questions. His legs trembled from standing in water for 5 hours. Lower back felt like tearing apart. But he was halfway done. One more night would finish it. At 0345, an American patrol passed 60 yards from his position. Vernon heard them before seeing them. He submerged to neck level, held perfectly still. The patrol moved parallel to his location for 90 seconds, then continued south. They never noticed him. If they had investigated, Vernon would have no explanation. Unauthorized presence behind perimeter, carrying materials, building unknown structures. Court-martial would be certain. But the patrol passed. Vernon resumed work for 15 more minutes. then returned to perimeter before dawn. November 21st, light rain. Vernon entered the swamp at 21:30 hours, earlier start. He needed to finish tonight. Rain improved concealment. The sound masked his movement. He located Cluster 8 quickly. His hands had memorized the feel of his own tripwires. He could identify them by tension and position. Continued north to Cluster 9. Installation proceeded faster on the third night. Vernon had refined his technique, knew which materials worked best. Understood optimal positioning. Clusters 9 through 16 went in steadily. By 0300 hours, he'd installed all 16 positions. 400 yards of complete coverage, from the southern beach access point to the northern perimeter gap. The entire infiltration route was trapped. He tested the system by walking the line deliberately. At Cluster 11, Vernon stepped on the tripwire, felt it catch his boot. The snare grabbed his ankle. He struggled instinctively to free himself. The snare tightened, pulled the noise trigger. The C-ration can rattled loudly. Vernon froze, listened for American reaction. Nothing. Too far from perimeter. He carefully freed himself using the release technique. Reset the trap. The system worked perfectly. Final quality check took 40 minutes. Vernon walked the entire 400-yard line, tested tension on every tripwire, verified snare positioning, checked noise trigger suspension, reinforced 3 weak anchor points, added extra camouflage at 2 locations where morning sun might create shadows. By 0430 hours, the system was complete. Total installation time over 3 nights, 17 hours. Total cost, $0. Total effectiveness, unknown. Vernon considered telling Sergeant Murphy, decided against it. If the system failed, Murphy had plausible deniability. If it worked, Vernon would take full responsibility. Either way, the court-martial risk belonged to Vernon alone. He accepted that. Baker's death was worth the risk. November 22nd through 27th. Nothing happened. No infiltration attempts on that route. Vernon checked the trap line every night during perimeter patrol. All traps remained set. No triggering, no damage. He started doubting himself. Maybe he'd picked the wrong route. Maybe Japanese had shifted to different game trails. Maybe the trap line was 17 hours wasted. Maybe Captain Mitchell had been right about sticking to rifles. November 27th evening. Battalion intelligence reported increased Japanese radio traffic. Pattern suggested imminent attack. All companies placed on high alert. Vernon checked his trap line at 2100 hours. Everything in position, every trap set, every cluster camouflaged. He returned to his foxhole, lay awake listening to swamp sounds, insects, water dripping, distant jungle noise. At 0217 hours on November 28, 1943, Vernon heard it. Pebbles rattling in a C-ration can, the distinct sound of his noise trigger. Cluster 6 had activated. Something was in his trap line. Vernon grabbed his rifle, moved toward the sound. 0217 hours. The rattling came from Cluster 6, 200 yards north of his foxhole. He didn't alert other positions yet. Needed verification first. Could be an animal. Could be friendly patrol. Could be equipment failure. He needed eyes on target before raising alarm. He moved through the perimeter gap at 0219, entered water quietly. Advanced 40 yards to his observation position. A mangrove cluster that provided cover and sightline to Cluster 6. Visibility was almost zero. Moonless night. Cloud cover. Darkness so complete he couldn't see his rifle barrel. He relied on sound and memory of trap positions. The rattling continued. Irregular rhythm. Someone struggling. Then Vernon heard voices. Japanese. Quiet but distinct. 2 soldiers attempting to communicate. One was caught in the snare. The other was trying to help free him. Vernon heard the sound of a knife cutting through vine. The trapped soldier was trying to sever the snare. Standard escape attempt, but Vernon had positioned backup snares. Cut one, catch the other. 0223. A second noise trigger activated. Cluster 8. 50 yards north of Cluster 6. Different rattling pattern. This can have fewer pebbles. Different sound signature. Multiple voices this time. More thrashing. More struggling. Vernon's mind calculated. Cluster 6. 2 soldiers minimum. Cluster 8, 3 or 4 based on voice count. This wasn't a patrol, this was a squad. 0225. Cluster 12 triggered. 150 yards north. 0226. Cluster 4 triggered. 100 yards south of his position. Vernon stopped counting individual activations. Multiple simultaneous triggers. Rattling sounds overlapping from different directions. This wasn't a squad. This was a platoon, maybe more. He moved back toward the perimeter. Found Sergeant Murphy at the command post. Murphy was awake, listening to the distant sounds from the swamp. Vernon approached. "Sergeant, we have contact in the swamp. Multiple enemy. Trapped." Murphy looked at him. "What do you mean, trapped?" "I set traps 3 nights ago. They're caught." Murphy stared at Vernon for 3 seconds. Processing. "You did what?" "Trapline, tripwires, vine snares, noise alerts. The system I proposed to Captain Mitchell. I built it anyway." Murphy's expression was unreadable. "Without authorization?" "Yes, Sergeant." Murphy listened to the swamp. The rattling sounds were clear now, audible from the command post. Distinct noise triggers activating in sequence. He could hear Japanese voices, splashing, struggling. "How many are caught?" "At least 15, Sergeant. Possibly more. I counted 8 distinct noise triggers, multiple voices at each position." Murphy woke Captain Mitchell. Mitchell arrived at the perimeter gap at 0232. He could hear everything from that position. Noise triggers rattling. Japanese voices calling to each other. Officers issuing commands. Soldiers attempting to organize retreat. The sound of men trapped in water, fighting against restraints they couldn't see or understand. Mitchell listened for 30 seconds. "Guidry, explain what I'm hearing." "Swamp step trapline, sir. Tripwires cause them to stumble. Vine snares catch ankles. Noise triggers alert our positions. I built the system last week. 400 yards of coverage along the primary infiltration route." "Without authorization?" "Yes, sir." "How many are caught?" Vernon listened to the swamp, counted distinct noise signatures, estimated voices per cluster. "At least 15, sir. Possibly more. Could be 20 or 25 based on trigger activation pattern." Mitchell made his decision in 5 seconds. Turned to Murphy. "Get first platoon ready. Combat load. We're going in." 0240. 30 soldiers assembled at perimeter gap, armed with M1 Garand rifles, Thompson submachine guns, grenades. Orders were clear. Advance to trapline. Accept surrender if offered. Neutralize threat if resistance continued. Vernon assigned his guide. He knew trap positions, could lead the platoon through safe approaches. Medical corpsmen attached. They anticipated wounded, both American and Japanese. First platoon entered the water in column formation. Vernon led. He marked the safe path by memory. Moved slowly, quietly. Japanese voices grew louder as they advanced. At 0248, Vernon raised his fist. "Halt signal." They were 30 yards from the first trapped soldiers. Cluster 4. Lieutenant James Harrison called out in broken Japanese. "Teiko shinaide kudasai." Do not resist. Silence from Japanese positions. Harrison repeated the command. Response came as gunfire. 3 rounds, poorly aimed. The shooter couldn't move to aim properly. His ankle was trapped. He was firing blind. Bullets hit water 10 yards short of American positions. Harrison gave the order. Return fire. Controlled bursts. The engagement lasted from 0250 to 0310 hours. 20 minutes of systematic neutralization. American forces advanced to each trap cluster methodically. Found 2 to 3 Japanese soldiers per cluster. Most had one or both ankles caught in snares. Several had cut themselves trying to free the vines. Some had exhausted themselves, struggling against restraints that tightened with resistance. 3 soldiers continued fighting despite immobilization. They were killed by return fire. 24 surrendered when surrounded. Cluster 4. 2 soldiers. Both ankles trapped in separate snares. Both surrendered immediately when Americans approached. No resistance. They'd been trapped for 35 minutes, exhausted from struggling. Cluster 6. 3 soldiers, including 1 officer. The officer had a knife, but couldn't reach the angle needed to cut the snare without falling into deeper water. He surrendered when Lieutenant Harrison aimed a rifle at his head. The other 2 soldiers were already incapacitated from exhaustion. Cluster 8. 4 soldiers. 1 was wounded. Self-inflicted knife cut trying to free his ankle. He'd severed a tendon. Couldn't stand even if freed. All 4 surrendered. The wounded soldier required immediate medical attention. American corpsmen treated him on site. Cluster 11. 2 soldiers. Both had been trapped for 40+ minutes. Hypothermia was setting in. Water temperature of 75 degrees felt warm initially, but caused core temperature drop after extended immersion. Both soldiers were shaking. Couldn't fight effectively. Surrendered without resistance. Cluster 12. 3 soldiers. 1 attempted to shoot at approaching Americans. His rifle jammed after first round. Wet ammunition. He cleared the jam. Aimed again. American return fire killed him before he could shoot. 8 rounds fired. 3 hit target. The soldier died instantly. The other 2 surrendered immediately. Cluster 14. 2 soldiers. Both had freed 1 ankle from the initial snare, but caught their second ankle in the backup snare Vernon had positioned. They were trapped in an awkward stance. 1 leg free, 1 leg caught. Couldn't maintain balance, couldn't run, couldn't fight effectively. Both surrendered. Final count at 0315 hours. 24 Japanese soldiers captured alive. 3 Japanese soldiers killed in firefight. Total infiltrators, 27. American casualties, 0. American ammunition expended, 47 rounds total. The most successful defensive engagement in Company C's deployment to Bougainville. Prisoner processing began immediately. Hands tied using their own belts. Some soldiers carried rope. Americans used that. Marched prisoners back to perimeter in single file. Medical treatment provided for snare injuries. Most injuries were minor. Lacerations from vine compression. Bruising around ankles. The self-inflicted knife wound was most serious. Corpsmen bandaged it. The soldier would require surgery, but would survive. Interrogation began at 0400 hours. Intelligence officer arrived from battalion headquarters. Questioned the captured officer first. The officer spoke limited English. Provided information through interpreter. This had been planned as the largest infiltration attack of November. Target was American ammunition dump 200 yards behind perimeter. 27 soldiers assigned. Objective was sabotage and casualty infliction. Expected American casualties if successful, 40 to 60 killed. Expected Japanese casualties, 5 to 8 killed during withdrawal. Vernon's trapline had prevented catastrophe. The infiltrators never reached their objective. Never engaged American positions from behind. Never sabotaged the ammunition dump. 0 American casualties. Complete mission failure for Japanese forces. Complete success for defensive innovation built without authorization. 0600 hours. Captain Mitchell toured the trapline. Brought Colonel Whitaker with him. Vernon guided both officers through the system. Demonstrated how traps worked. Showed materials used. Explained Louisiana trapline technique. Pointed out salvaged components. Vines from strangler figs. Bamboo from inland groves. Wire from damaged communications lines. Sea ration cans for noise triggers. Pebbles from the beach. Total construction cost, $0. Construction time, 17 hours over 3 nights. Effectiveness, 100% capture rate. 27 infiltrators, 27 stopped. 0 penetrations, 0 American casualties. Colonel Whitaker examined the system carefully. Stood at cluster 6 for 5 minutes. Tested the vine snare by pulling on it. Watched it constrict, released it. Checked tripwire tension. Pulled the noise trigger leader. Heard the can rattle. Examined the camouflage technique. Finally spoke. "Corporal Guidry, you built this without authorization." "Yes, sir." "You violated standing orders about defensive modifications." "Yes, sir." "You risked court-martial." "Yes, sir." Whitaker looked at him. "How many Americans died in infiltration attacks since you arrived on this island?" Vernon thought about it. Morrison, Baker, Chen, Hayes, others he'd seen carried out. 41, sir. That I know of personally." "How many died last night?" "None, sir." Whitaker nodded once. Court-martial charges dropped. "Build more trap lines. I'm authorizing materials requisition. 2,000 feet of cordage, 500 bamboo stakes, 1,000 feet of wire, 100 metal containers for noise triggers. You have 10 soldiers to assist you. 2-week deadline. Cover all 8 swamp infiltration routes." Vernon understood. The system worked. Command recognized it. Authorization was retroactive. What had been violation of orders yesterday was approved defensive innovation today. The Army functioned on results. Vernon had delivered results. 27 captured enemies, 0 friendly casualties. The numbers justified everything. By 0800 hours, the entire battalion knew about the trapline. By 1200 hours, Division Headquarters requested briefing. By 1800 hours, the neighboring 25th Infantry Division requested Vernon's assistance building similar systems. Nobody called it unauthorized anymore. Everyone called it the Guidry Trapline. Some soldiers shortened it to gator traps. Louisiana swamp technique had come to the Pacific Theater. And it worked. November 29th through December 12th, 1943. Vernon trained 10 soldiers on trapline construction technique. They built systems on 7 additional swamp infiltration routes. Total coverage expanded to 2,800 yards of coastline. 112 trap clusters installed across Company C's defensive sector. Average construction time per cluster dropped to 55 minutes. Team installation was faster than solo work. The system improved through iteration. Vernon developed a quick release mechanism for friendly passage. American patrols could cross trap lines safely using a specific sequence. Step on the left side of tripwire. Reach down. Release tension pin. Cross. Reset. Enemy infiltrators didn't know the sequence. They triggered normally. The quick release prevented friendly casualties during legitimate patrol operations. Vernon added secondary trigger systems. Backup snares positioned behind primary snares. If infiltrators cut the first line, they'd catch the second. He created indicator traps at channel entrance points. These were designed to show damage patterns without catching. Morning inspection revealed which routes Japanese forces had scouted. Command could predict infiltration attempts based on indicator disturbance. Daily inspection protocol became standard. Every dawn, soldiers checked trap conditions. Saltwater and tide cycles affected vine tension. Traps required maintenance every 72 hours. Vines needed replacing every 5 to 7 days. The inspection routine kept systems operational continuously. December results proved effectiveness. 6 infiltration attempts occurred. 19 Japanese soldiers captured. 4 Japanese soldiers killed attempting to cut through traps while under fire. 0 successful penetrations. 0 American casualties from infiltration. 100% interdiction rate. The numbers spoke clearly. Japanese response changed tactically. Intelligence intercepts from mid-December showed frustration at command level. Prisoners reported new orders: avoid swamp routes. The traplines hadn't just stopped infiltration. They'd eliminated an entire avenue of approach. Japanese forces shifted to overland infiltration through jungle terrain. American patrols engaged them on dry land. Visibility was better. Fields of fire were clear. Engagement ratio favored Americans 8-1. Traplines had forced Japanese into terrain disadvantage. December 15th, 37th Division Commander issued General Order. All units in swamp terrain will implement Guidry trapline systems. Vernon was assigned as division-level technical advisor. He trained 47 soldiers from different companies across the division. Each company built traplines on their defensive sectors. By December 31st, 47 trapline systems protected division perimeter. Total trap clusters exceeded 340. Coverage extended 11 miles of swamp coastline. The innovation had scaled from 400 yards to 11 miles in 33 days. January 1944. 25th Infantry Division requested training. Different sector of Bougainville. Same terrain problems, same infiltration casualties. Vernon deployed there January 10th through 17th. Trained 23 soldiers, supervised 6 trapline installations. Results were immediate. First week, 14 Japanese infiltrators captured. 0 successful penetrations. The 25th adopted traplines as standard defensive doctrine. 3rd Marine Division requested training in late January. Marines were initially skeptical. They called it Army trickery. Marines preferred direct engagement. Traps seemed passive, unsportsmanlike. Vernon demonstrated the system, explained the casualty reduction statistics. One Marine gunnery sergeant asked the obvious question: "How many of your boys died last month from infiltration?" Vernon's answer was simple: "None." The gunnery sergeant nodded. "Teach us." Marines built 18 trapline systems. First week results changed opinions permanently. 14 infiltrators captured, 0 Marine casualties. The gunnery sergeant who'd questioned Vernon became the most vocal advocate. He told every Marine unit on Bougainville about the traplines, called them gator traps, said they worked better than guard posts. By February, Marines had built 32 trapline systems across their defensive sectors. The system adapted to different terrain. Guadalcanal presented jungle stream infiltration routes. Vernon modified the design for moving water, used anchored platforms instead of mangrove routes. Tripwires attached to platform structures. Snares positioned on platform edges. Worked effectively in current up to 3 knots. New Georgia required beach landing interdiction. Vernon modified for tidal zones. Traps reset automatically with tide cycles. Rising tide armed the system. Falling tide maintained it. Each terrain type required different materials, but same core principle. February 1944. U.S. Army Pacific Command issued training manual. Field Manual 20-41. Title: Field Expedient Infiltration Barriers. 27 pages. Detailed diagrams showing trap construction. Materials lists with substitution options. Installation procedures broken into step-by-step instructions. Maintenance protocols. Safety procedures for friendly passage. The manual codified Vernon's Louisiana muskrat technique into official Army doctrine. Vernon's name appeared once in acknowledgement section. Corporal Vernon Guidry, 37th Infantry Division, provided technical consultation. One sentence, no detailed credit, no explanation of origin. The manual presented traplines as institutional knowledge. Army innovation, command-approved methodology. Nobody reading it would know a Louisiana trapper had invented the entire system in violation of orders. Statistical impact was measurable. January through February 1944, 12 infantry divisions used traplines. 89 infiltration attempts recorded. 7 successful infiltrations, 7.9% success rate. Compared to September through November 1943, 94 infiltration attempts, 48 successful, 51% success rate. The traplines had reduced enemy success rate by 84%. American casualties dropped dramatically. September through November 1943, 94 soldiers killed by infiltration. January through February 1944, 11 soldiers killed. 87.3% casualty reduction. Japanese casualties reversed. September through November 1943, 23 killed, 0 captured. January through February 1944, 67 killed, 143 captured. The tactical advantage had completely shifted. Japanese infantry manuals updated in March 1944. Captured documents showed new sections on American trap systems. Recommended countermeasures included sending advanced scouts to trigger traps deliberately, using poles to probe for trip wires, cutting wider paths through mangroves to avoid choke points. Every countermeasure increased time and noise, defeated the infiltration purpose. Speed and stealth were impossible while clearing traps. March 18th, New Georgia. Japanese squad attempted probe technique. Took 90 minutes to advance 100 yards. American patrol heard them. Engaged from superior position. 8 Japanese killed. 0 Americans casualties. April 3rd, Bougainville. Japanese used bamboo poles to sweep for wires. Triggered trap cluster 7. Pole technique worked on primary trigger. Didn't detect secondary backup system. 5 soldiers caught anyway. Psychological impact on Japanese forces was significant. Prisoners interrogated in April reported low morale regarding infiltration missions. One captured officer stated, "We are told Americans hunt us like animals. We cannot move through swamps without capture. Better to stay in defensive positions than volunteer for infiltration." Infiltration volunteer rates declined. Japanese command assigned infiltration duty as punishment. Soldiers feared swamps more than direct combat. The traplines had created psychological barrier beyond physical effectiveness. January 1944. Vernon promoted to sergeant. February. Awarded Bronze Star. Citation read, Corporal Guidry's initiative resulted in capture of 27 enemy soldiers and prevented significant American casualties through development of innovative defensive tactics. The medal ceremony lasted 5 minutes. Vernon received the Bronze Star from Colonel Whitaker, shook hands, returned to duty. No speech, no celebration, just recognition that he'd done something effective. April 1944. Vernon assigned to Army Pacific Training Command, pulled from combat operations, spent remainder of war teaching trapline construction. He hated leaving Company C. His squad was moving to Philippines campaign. He wanted to go with them, command. Refused. Said he was more valuable as instructor than combat soldier. More valuable teaching than fighting. Vernon understood the logic, but didn't like it. Training duty kept him at rear area bases. He taught trapline construction to 340 soldiers over 8 months. Every soldier took the knowledge to combat, applied it in different terrain, saved lives Vernon would never know about. Sergeant Murphy wrote Vernon one letter from Philippines. Said the squad missed him. Said they were using trap lines in Luzon, working perfectly. Murphy was killed in Manila, February 1945. Vernon learned about it 3 weeks later, felt guilty he wasn't there, felt he'd abandoned his squad. Survivors told him later that Murphy died in street fighting. Trap lines wouldn't have helped. Vernon understood that intellectually. Emotionally, he still felt responsible. August 1945. War ended. Vernon was at training facility in Luzon when news arrived. Japan surrendered. He felt relief mixed with emptiness. Discharged. September 1945. Returned to Terrebonne Parish, Louisiana. Back to trapping muskrats in the same bayou swamps where he'd learned the techniques that saved 200 American lives in the Pacific. He never talked much about the war. When people asked, he'd say he was a mechanic, fixed equipment, did some training, that's all. 1947. Army Field Manual 20-41 revised. Removed trapline section. Reason cited. Limited applicability to future conflicts. Vernon's name disappeared from documentation. Nobody remembered the sergeant who built the first system. Nobody remembered November 28, 1943. The Army had moved on to different threats, different doctrine, different wars. 1951, Korean War. U.S. forces faced infiltration problems along Pusan perimeter. North Korean soldiers used stream beds for nighttime infiltration. Pattern was identical to Bougainville. Commander at Pusan was Colonel James Mitchell, same captain who'd initially rejected Vernon's trapline proposal in 1943. Mitchell remembered. Requested engineers implement similar systems. Engineer response: no doctrine exists for such systems. Mitchell's reply: then write new doctrine. It worked in 1943. Korean War traplines were credited to field expedient barriers developed during Pacific Campaign. Vernon's name not mentioned. 1966. Vietnam. U.S. forces used tripwire systems in jungle extensively. Same principle as Vernon's traplines. Different materials, modern wire, electronic sensors, same concept, alert and immobilize. Credit attributed to Vietnam-era innovations. Vernon watched news reports, saw soldiers setting traps in Vietnamese jungle, recognized his own techniques. Never told anyone he'd invented it 23 years earlier, just watched quietly from Louisiana. 1985. Military historian researching Bougainville. Campaign found combat report from November 28, 1943. Corporal Vernon Guidry, 27 enemy captured using improvised barrier system. Historian tracked Vernon down through veteran registries. Found him in Terrebonne Parish, age 66. Still trapping muskrats. Still using the same vine-tying techniques he'd used in the Pacific. Vernon confirmed the story, showed the historian how snares worked. Same constrictor knot, same tension principles, same system that captured 27 Japanese infiltrators 42 years earlier. Vernon Guidry died in 2004, age 85. Local newspaper obituary, 4 paragraphs. Mentioned military service, served in Pacific Theater, World War II. Did not mention trap lines. Did not mention 27 prisoners. Did not mention 200 lives saved. Funeral attended by 23 people. Family, neighbors, fellow trappers. No military honor guard. Just quiet service for a man who'd saved hundreds of lives using techniques his grandfather taught him. Modern U.S. Army Field Manual. 7-8, Infantry Rifle Platoon and Squad. Section 6-18. Expedient barriers and warning devices. Describes tripwire systems, noise alerts, mechanical delays. Same principles Vernon used. His name not mentioned anywhere. Marine Corps doctrine includes similar systems. Special forces teach trap construction and survival courses, all based on Louisiana muskrat trapping, all invented by a corporal nobody remembers. What Vernon proved? Innovation doesn't require genius, requires observation and willingness to act. 17 hours of work prevented catastrophe. $0 budget created complete defensive system. Breaking regulations sometimes saves lives. Enlisted soldiers sometimes see solutions officers miss. The numbers that mattered. Before traplines, 94 Americans killed, 48 successful infiltrations, 51% enemy success rate. After traplines, 11 Americans killed, 7 successful infiltrations, 7.9% enemy success rate. Casualty reduction, 87.3%. 200 to 300 American lives saved by one corporal's refusal to accept doctrine that killed soldiers. Vernon's own words from 1985 interview. I just did what made sense. Back home, if muskrats use the same trails, you trap the trails. Japanese use the same trails, so I trapped them. Wasn't complicated. The army wanted to fight with rifles. Sometimes you don't need to fight. Sometimes you just need to stop them from moving. That's what traps do. Captain Mitchell rejected the idea. Colonel Whitaker nearly court-martialed Vernon for building it. Same officers later recommended Bronze Star. Same system they rejected saved 200 lives. Command doesn't always know best. Sometimes the corporal from Louisiana knows better. Vernon Guidry wasn't special, wasn't a tactical genius, wasn't a decorated hero. He just understood one simple thing. Animals follow patterns. Humans are animals. Trap the pattern. Stop the animal. He tied some vines together in a swamp, saved hundreds of lives, died unknown. Just another soldier who did his job.